Hey guys, it's the Warhipster here, coming at you with another Space Wolves painting tutorial, and today we are painting the mighty Gladiator Valiant. So, quick note before we begin. This tank has been primed in Grey Seer. I've left the turret off. I've not had to glue that down because, well, you just generally don't have to, particularly if you want it to spin. Woo, like that, because, you know, who doesn't like a tank turret that moves? So that's not been glued down. I've also not mounted it onto the base just yet. I have built the base, as you can see. There it is. But I haven't put it on yet because we are going to want to do the underside of the tank as well. We don't have to do everything on the other side, just all the stuff that you can see. But yeah, that's all the things that we're going to be covering just to begin with. So what we want to do is we're going to start with the armor. Now, we're going to be using contrast paint for this. So for those of you who've seen my Razorback tutorial, you'll know. So we're going to be painting all of the Space Wolves armor, and oddly enough, the color that we're going to be using for this is Space Wolves Grey. Now before we begin, the best thing to do is to separate your tank into sections and just know that you need to finish that section before you moved on. So what we're going to do is we're going to separate this tank into sections. Now we're going to do this entire left hand side. We want to do the front, we want to do the right hand side, we want to do the back, and then we want to do this kind of top bit here as a separate section, as well as the underside as well. Within that, what we can then also do is we can set up another set of sections. So for example, on this left hand side, what we've got is we've got all the way up to here. So we've got this whole area around the sponson, that's the whole section. We've got this area between this, from beyond the sponson going down up to out there, and then we've got this area as a section, and then we've got this area here as a section as well. Now I'm going to be using a couple of brushes as I do this. I'm going to be using a medium shade brush, and I'm also going to be using a brand new medium layer brush that I haven't yet taken out of the packaging. So without further ado, what we're going to do is going to start painting all of this armor. Now the way to do this, the reason we have those multiple brushes on standby, is that we want to take this very steadily and we want to go a section at a time, as I've already said. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to demonstrate here on the side exactly what you want to do. So I'm going to start with that medium shade brush, and I'm just going to dip into the pot straight away like this, and I want to take quite a bit of this off. I kind of want to almost kind of wet the brush, and I just want to take this in big broad brush strokes with the Space Wolves Grey. Now don't worry too much about it being a little too gloopy, because what we can do, we can just move that paint around using the brush, just taking it very steadily all over. And I've got a hair because all of my models seem to end up with a bit of a hair trapped in the brush or the bristles at some point or other. There he is. Just get off. Yeah, like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to keep going. So I'm going to start back over here. I'm not going to worry about getting this on the tracks or the grav plates as they are, because they are going to be coloured in a silver, and it doesn't matter if we get contrast on that because we can just go over that a little bit later. So we're just going to keep going like this. And the reason why we're not going to worry too much about it getting a bit too streaky is because we are going to use a glaze just to smooth it all out that we're going to make ourselves, which I'll demonstrate after this stage. So there we go. You see, that's the whole section, and it's a little bit streaky, so I'm just going to wash that brush now and pop it to one side. And what I'm going to do, I'm just going to grab the medium layer brush to demonstrate it up here on this little this little area around here. So I'm just going to, that's too much paint. So if it ever looks like it's dripping, you've got too much paint on your brush. So now we're just going to very carefully do the same thing again. I'm going to make contact with the model, just start pulling it around. Just want to keep that contrast paint moving as long as possible whilst it's still wet. Like that. There's a little too much paint there. Getting impatient. There we go. So that's basically a whole section finished. Now what we could do is we could just go under, just continue our little contrast paint journey here to around about there. You don't want to kind of forget anywhere, which is very easy to do when painting something like a tank. This little section just under there. Go up to around there. And we just want to paint in and around here as well. It's going to be a little bit messy here because it doesn't need to be 100% accurate because you're never going to see that detail. Like this, just moving the brush around. Like that. There we go. That is a whole section now complete. Now, as I say, don't worry about it being a bit streaky. We are going to fix it. So I'm just going to keep going, painting in all these areas. With that done, you should now have a Space Wolves Gladiator that looks something like this. Now, it looks okay. It's a little blotchy in patches, but what we want to do before we smooth all of those patches out is we want to enrich this color just a little bit more. So we're going to create a roughly 4 parts contrast medium to 1 part Space Wolves Grey mix. And we're going to use this over the top of all of that Space Wolves Grey that we've just done. I'm just trying to pick a place to start. We'll just start down here. Now we just want to get this all over just to give it that real kind of solid Space Wolves armor tone. Don't worry if it's still a little bit weak, because we've got one more layer to do in terms of, well, it's the smoothing out layer, which is going to be the glaze. What this will do is it will smooth out some of the patches, not all of them. We just want to get this so that when we do our next glaze, it's a lot easier to do. And with that done, what we now want to do is we want to smooth out all of these splotches and any kind of scratch marks or kind of weirdness that we don't want on there. So what we're going to do is we're going to make a rough mixture of about 10 parts contrast medium to 1 part Russ Grey, because we want to make this really kind of thin, almost like a glaze type thing. See it there on my fingernail. It's definitely got a lot of kind of colour to it, because I've got actually quite a lot on my brush. I'm just going to take some of that off. There we go. So we want to make this really thin Russ Grey contrast medium mix. As I say, 10 parts contrast medium to 1 part Russ Grey mix. And we want to use this basically on the flats of the panels just to smooth out any of these sections where it's a bit blotchy. So I'm going to start, I think, just here on this big open one. Just going to start painting this thin mixture all over this, trying to avoid any of the recesses, which admittedly there aren't very many on a big flat open space. Trying to avoid the recesses and trying to avoid any of the edges as well. If we can avoid the edges, the first highlight is done for us. And just use the flat of the brush when you're going across areas where there's a kind of a recess like that one there. That way you just go straight across it. So once again, just across here, just want to add this Russ Grey mix over it like this. And don't worry if it looks a little bit streaky. What you can do is you can just do a second coat of this glaze, but generally you won't need it. As you can see, it's already smoothed out that area right there in the middle and really enriched that colour as well. And so with the left side of the Gladiator done, I've also done the right hand side of the Gladiator as well, because, well, the method is exactly the same. So just before we do any of the highlights, because the highlight is going to be of various dry brushes, what we are going to do is we are just going to make sure that we get the rest of the armour done before we do that, rather than dry brushing it now and then having to go back and do it. So the next section we're going to work on is the front, and, well, the application is exactly the same as it's doing a bit on the side. I'm just going to take it a section at a time, and the place we're going to start is around here, using the Space Wolves Grey. So I've been across the entire tank and I've done all of the armour. It's exactly the same method. across all of it. No tricks on any of the rest of it. So what we're going to do now is we're going to do some highlights. And as I said, we're going to be doing dry brushing for this, and the first colour that we're going to be using is Fenrisian Grey. What we want to do is we're going to just take a little bit more off than we would normally, because we want to be very gentle here as we start dry brushing this across the whole of the tank like this, just catching the edges with the Fenrisian Grey. That's going to be quite a subtle highlight. This is just to strengthen out any of that Space Wolves Grey highlights that may be left behind from where you've done the Russ Grey glaze. So we just want to keep going like I'm doing here across the whole miniature. And with that Fenrisian Grey applied, what we now want to do is we want to do exactly the same thing again, but a little bit more gentle. And the colour that we're going to use for that is Blue Horror. Now all we want to do is just be very, very careful here, because we don't want lots of Blue Horror. Just want to basically just catch. Just make sure that we haven't got too much on the brush here. Slightly catch the edges around the model with the Blue Horror. We're not going all over. That's the other thing to bear in mind. Want this to be basically the spot highlight, to really just give it the impression of the light catching off some of those edges like it's doing there. And so with both those dry brushes applied, our Space Wolves Grey armour is now finished. For now. We can do some battle damage a bit later, but we're not going to focus on that right now, because what we are going to do is we're going to move on and paint the next biggest colour on these on this Gladiator, and that is going to be all of the silver details. Now the colour that I'm going to be using is Iron Warriors, and realistically this section is entirely up to you what you want to paint, but what we want to do is we just want to start painting this Iron Warriors all over any of the areas that we want to be silver. So I'm going to be doing areas like these hover plates, going to be doing stuff like this with these vents here, going to be doing this section up here like that. I'm also going to be painting in any of these kinds of cables and pipes like this, like that, and any other little metallic details that I want to be silver. So areas like the vents and engines and all that kind of stuff, all this sort of thing. So this is going to take a little bit of time, but it's absolutely worth it once it's done. So you just want to go around picking out all of these silver details, and then we'll come back. And with all that silver applied across the miniature, well, he's starting to look like he's coming together. So we're just going to continue with the metallics just for the second, because what we're going to do is we're going to use some Retributor Armour. We're going to use this to colour in all of the skulls and any of the winged Aquillas. So we've got a little skull just here. Just want to get this Retributor Armour all over it like that, just being very careful around all that Space Wolves Grey armour that we've already painted in. like that. Similarly, we've got a little winged Aquila up here. Just going to add that Retributor Armour over the top of. Like so. So just want to go around picking out all of these details, like I'm doing. And then we'll come back. And so with all that silver and gold applied, just before we do any of the shading, what we're now going to do is work on all the black details. And the first colour that we're going to be using for this is Basilicanum Grey, and this is to give us a pre-shade, which will give the Black Templar something to cling on to as we paint that over. Don't worry about doing the heat shields. I remembered of the melter guns because they're going to be a different metallic, but we don't need to do them right now. Just wanted to get the two main ones, the gold and the silver, out of the way. So what we do now is we take our Basilicanum Grey and we just start coating it over all the areas that we want to be black. So areas like the handles on any of the bars, as well as kind of the housings on the guns. This area around here on the turret with the kind of spotter scope there. I just want to keep going around capturing all of these details like this. You just want to be a little bit careful when you get close to any of that Space Wolves grey, but it doesn't matter too much if you get this on any of those metallics, because it'll just act as some shading for them, which we're pretty much going to be shading the silver with Basilicanum Grey anyway, so you're saving yourself a job a little bit if you do make a little mistake. So you just want to go around doing all of this, and then we'll come back. And with that done, what we're now going to do, just keeping with the Basilicanum Grey just for a little bit, is we're going to make a roughly 2 parts contrast medium to 1 part Basilicanum Grey mix. We're going to use this to shade all of that silver. Now, there's no real art to doing this. You just want to get this all over these silver details. The reason that we're using the contrast medium is just to make it flow a little bit better, so that our shade goes a little bit further, but it actually also still retains that Iron Warriors-esque edge, so it makes our job of highlighting even easier. And with all of that done, what we're now going to do is going to shade the remaining gold details. And the colour we're going to use for that is Fyreslayer Flesh. Just going to start painting this all over, once again just being very careful. And all of that Space Wolves armour. Like so. And with that Fyreslayer Flesh applied, it's now time to colour in all of the black. Now the colour that we're going to use is of course Black Templar. And what we want to do is just over all those areas that we painted that Basilicanum Grey, so we just want to start painting this Black Templar over the top. You can see on this handle right away that it's already doing its job over the top of that Basilicanum Grey. This is why we do the pre-shade. Similarly over here, coming down there. So it comes out as a really nice dark black, rather than as a really kind of, it's not thin, but it comes out as a really dark grey. You just do it without the Basilicanum Grey first. So just want to go over all of these areas, picking them out with the Black Templar. And with that done, what we're now going to do is we're going to colour in that last base coat, at least before we do any of these lenses and things. And the colour that we're going to be using for this is Runelord Brass. And we're going to paint this all over the heat shields on the melter, the multi-melter. We're also going to do it on these canisters here on the back as well. So we just want to go all over with this Runelord Brass. Make sure we work it into those little recesses. And so with that done, what we're now going to do is we're going to highlight all of those silver details, and the first colour we're going to use is Iron Hand Steel. Now the way we're going to do this to begin with is we're going to dry brush all of these tracks with the Iron Hand Steel, because we don't need to sit and line highlight it, because, well, we just don't. So what we want to do is we want to take the, take the Iron Hand Steel. We're just going to start lightly dry brushing over the top like this. However, we are going to need to do some line highlights of this Iron Hand Steel over the top of all the other silver details, but we'll get to that in just a second. And so with that done, what we're now going to do is we're going to move on and do the rest of the silver highlights. We're going to continue with the Iron Hand Steel just for now. And what we want to do basically is it's a mixture of a layer and also of an edge highlight. So what we do is on some of these kind of like wide open areas. So for example, this this handle here on the back, what we want to do is basically just want to do a really big wide highlight, almost like a layer, like this, over the top, just avoiding where that shade has really settled, giving it a nice bright look. You just want to make sure you've got that kind of even line going all the way over, like that. Whereas on somewhere like the little vent here, we just want to paint this Iron Hand Steel over the top of the edge like this, and then try and pick out the edge on the silver down here like that. Similarly here on the engine, we want to make sure that we get this bit, but then we also want to edge highlight the wider open space. And really this is entirely up to you, kind of how much of this kind of brighter metal that you want. So like that kind of thing. So a good example of this is on the turret here. So what I want is I want that gun to be nice and bright. So I'm going to use my Iron Hand Steel to basically relayer all of the metal like that, and then similarly along that bit there. Just want to do an edge highlight like that, just to really make it stand out in amongst all of that black casing. And so with all of that Iron Hand Steel applied, we can see as I've actually added over the top of these lenses as well, just around here on the little window kind of viewing oculuses or whatever they're called. I don't actually know. Write in the comments if you know what they are. So with all of that done, what we're now going to do is we're going to highlight all of the black. And the colour that we're going to use for this is Dawnstone. We just want to get some thin down on our palette, take a small amount, just want to very carefully start picking out all the edges on all of that black detail. like that. So with that done, what we're now going to do is we're going to shade in those heat shields on the melter guns, and we're also going to shade in this tank on the back. So in order to shade this bit on the back, all we're going to do simply is take some Basilicanum Grey. But you'll notice that I do have 3 pots of paint open, because we're going to require all 3 of those for those heat shields. And those 3 paints are Basilicanum Grey, Wyldwood, and Shyish Purple. I'm going to demonstrate that in just a second. So of course we want to just get this all over. We always want to finish what we started every single time, because otherwise you end up with a bit of a streak if you try and revisit it once you've already done something with contrast. If you've let it dry, generally want to just leave it alone. That's why you always want to finish the fight, as it were. So I'm just going to finish this off, just getting it on here as well. Make sure we get it all the way around that corner. Get it across there and over there like that. So that's now shaded in and looking lovely. I'm going to wash the brush now. I'm going to return to those heat shields. So the first colour that we're going to use is Basilicanum Grey. We want to take a fair amount of this on our brush, because we want to get this done as quickly as possible, because we want to do all of this whilst it's still wet. So we take the Basilicanum Grey and we just paint it all over. Make sure to work it into those recesses on the heat shield as well, like that. I want to do it on the inside too. Like this. Make sure that we just get it inside the barrel too, and always just check underneath as well, like that. And check the top as well, just in case you missed a bit. Perfect. So now we're going to wash the brush. Now we're going to take some Wyldwood. I'm going to add this Wyldwood whilst it's still wet. You don't want to take quite as much. We want to add this to the base of the heat shield, so towards the closest part of the gun. Just want to add this in like this. I don't know if it looks a little bit strong at the moment. Once we do the next colour, it kind of takes that out a little bit. So there we go, got a half and half like that. So next up, what we're going to do is we're going to then take some Shyish Purple, and this is going to add the heat, as it were, the kind of tempered metal. We just want to add this across that middle part where the 2 colours meet. You want to do it again down the other side as well. Of course, we want to make sure that we've got it all like that. Then what we do is we wash the brush, and we use the brush to just move all of these colours around like this until we're happy with it, giving us a nice blend across the whole section of the model. As you can see, you've got various different tones in there, giving this lovely kind of burnt metal look. And with that now done, what we're going to do next is we're going to highlight all of the gold details, and we're also going to highlight those heat shields, and we're going to be using the same colour for this, and that colour is Sycorax Bronze. So we've got some pre-thinned on our palette. So just going to take a small amount. I'm just going to start picking out all of the extreme edges of these details. Like this. And so with that done, our Gladiator is very nearly finished. However, we've just got a couple of areas that we've left to do, and these include all of the lenses, little windows, little kind of aiming sights and all that kind of stuff. And of course, we also have the missiles here on the Icarus rocket pod. So what we're going to do is going to work on all those lenses first, and the colours that we're going to use are Warp Lightning and Blood Angels Red. We're not going to use them at the same time, we're going to use them on different ones, but effectively these are the 2 colours that we're going to use to put our base coats down. So I'm going to start with the Blood Angels Red, and I'm going to use this to paint in all of these kind of flat little ones that are based around the miniature, like this one here. You've got several of them around the base of the turret, as well as each of the little hatches. I'm just trying to be really careful around all of that Space Wolves armour that I've already painted in, like that. So that's great for the first one. What I'm also going to do is I'm going to use some Warp Lightning. I'm going to use this on any kind of the aiming sites. So here we've got this little gizmo here on top. I'm going to use this Warp Lightning over the top, like that. I'm using this contrast paint over the top of a bright metallic like Iron Hand Steel, just gives you a really nice shiny finish, as you can see there, like that. So just going to go around like this, finishing off all of these little contraptions. And so with all of that done, we'll just transfer it over to the turret just for a second because it's a little bit easier to show you. So we've got 2 reds here, and we've got 3 reds. Oh, I miscalculated. So we've got 1, 2, and 3. So what we're going to do now is we're going to finish off these red lenses before we do just a little bit of a highlight on the green ones. So what we're going to do next is we're going to use some Wyldwood, just a little bit. And on top of these red lenses, what we want to do is we want to just paint this Wyldwood over the top of the bottom, going up from bottom left to top right, like that. Then what we do is we wash the brush and just give it a cheeky little wet blend. Just kind of pull it out a little bit, like that, just to take the edge off. By wet blend, basically what I mean there is just dab at where that line kind of comes together over the red to kind of just soften that transition. So you see, we've got a red at the top and a darker brown at the bottom, creating that element of shadow. So we'll do it one more time, just to demonstrate. Let's take a tiny little bit of Wyldwood, a little bit more than that. And so from the bottom left up to the top right, like that. So you can see we've got a very clear line there. So what we do is we wash the brush and then we just feather that out a little bit, just by kind of dabbing it where the 2 colours meet, just to kind of soften that transition a little bit. And so with that done, once again, just focusing on the turret, what we're going to do is going to take a small amount of Fire Dragon Bright, and we're going to use this to just highlight the top left corner of each of these red lenses and spotting devices. Just like that. So you see it gives you this darker to lighter transition. Strengthen that up a little bit more. There we go, perfect. And lastly, just to finish off all of these lenses and gems and all this kind of stuff, we're going to use a teeny amount of Corax White. So on the red ones, what we want to do is we want to place a little dot of it at the sharpest point, like that. Whereas on the green ones, what we want to do is we want to pass a little dot in the top right corner, like that, and it just gives it that, reinforces the shiny nature of those green gems, like that. So you just want to go around all of them and finish them in the same manner. Still sticking with the Corax White just for 1 hot minute. We're going to use it to paint in the missiles on this launcher here. Like that. And next up, what we're going to do is we're going to use a little bit of Phalanx Yellow. I'm going to use this just to colour in the headlamps in between the frames of these lanterns, like that. And so with those headlights done on the tank, our Gladiator is now fully painted, and you could leave it there and it would look very nice. All you'd need to do is do your base. I've started doing mine in the same style as the rest of my Space Wolves army. However, we're not going to leave it there. What we are going to do is we're going to do some decals. Now, I'm not going to show this in the tutorial. We've done this before a couple of times. If you want to see how you can do decals, you can check out the How to Paint Blood Angels Outriders video, and I'll give you the basics on how to do it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get on with putting those decals on, and then I'm going to come back and I'm going to demonstrate how to do some battle damage on this vehicle. We've covered that before, but I think it's interesting to show it on a different video for Space Wolves rather than the Blood Angels. You'll see when we get there. So as promised, we've got all of our decals now attached to our Gladiator. It's looking pretty cool. So what we're going to do now is we're going to just add a little bit of wear and tear to the tank, because I like to have my tanks have a little bit of wear and tear. So what we're going to do is we're going to take some black Templar, and I'm going to use a small brush for this. I'm using a small layer brush from Games Workshop, no less. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use this to create some little gouges and little nicks in the armor. So what we want to do is we just want to kind of put a little cut like round about there. Maybe another one down here. And another one like that. Put another one like around here, sort of type thing. Just, you know, scatter them around at random. Now, this is completely optional. You do not have to do this if you do not want to. And it just adds quite a lot to some of these areas. And so with our nicks and scratches added, what we're now going to do is going to add a little bit of chipping to the model. And so to do this, what we want to do is we want to create like kind of lots of really tiny little indents in the armor. We also want these to be dirty, as if the idea of like shrapnel or dirt has blown up over the side of the tank as it's moved through the battlefield, for example. So in order to do this, what we want to do is get a bit of tissue paper and get a really old base brush or dry brush, something that you're not going to use, that's all kind of flailed out and not very good to look at anymore. Basically a useless brush. What we want to do is take a bit of scissors and just chop the end off of it like that, and that gives you this really short but hard stipple brush. Because what we're going to do is we're going to do a bit of stippling, and the colour that we're going to use to do that is we're going to use some Cygor Brown. So just take a really small amount of this on your brush, and then on your tissue paper, what you want to do is just start tapping it in to the tissue paper like this until you get the effect that you are after. So you can see it there. You just want to press on either side just to make sure you haven't got like too much of a thing like that. So you can see that's where we had all the paint, that's where we have very little of the paint. And then what we want to do is take our tank and do exactly the same thing again in certain areas that we want to add a little bit of dusting to. So we just want to start stippling it in areas where we want this type of damage to be appearing. So I'm going to add a little bit of dirt there on that corner, like that. I'm going to add a little bit of it on here as well. Do some in here. Not adding loads. Don't want to muck this tank up too much, as it does fly. Just imagine that even the skies of the 41st millennium are dirty places to be. And so with our tanks scuffed up a little bit, got a little bit of dirt here on the front, as you can see, and I've done some on the side. What we're going to do now is we're going to highlight that area. Now, in order to highlight it, rather than painfully doing a bunch of red highlights. What we are going to do is going to use another stipple brush. I've got this other old dry brush that's all splayed out and horrible. It's perfect this kind of thing. So to highlight it, what you want to do is you want to take the highlight of the armor that you used in the first place. And in this case, the final highlight that we used was Blue Horror. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a little bit of Blue Horror on our dry brush. And rather than doing what we would normally do, where we kind of work it into the bristles, we're going to once again start stippling it into the paper until we get the type of effect that we are after, like that sort of thing. And then we just start doing exactly the same thing, like slightly lighter in amongst that dirt that we've added. Like this. And lastly, what we can do, just to highlight, I'm just going to take this off just for a second. We can highlight any of the kind of larger scratches that we've done with the black Templar originally. So I've got one here. I'm going to use the same colour with the Blue Horror. Like this. Just give it a bit of a 3D-esque look. You only want to do it on one side. You don't want to do both sides of it because you want it to look like it's dug in from a certain angle. And again, you don't have to do this on all of the little nicks and scratches. Some will be deeper than others, as it were. And there we have it. One Space Wolves Gladiator Valiant battle tank ready to vanquish the foes of the Allfather and of Russ. It was a lot of fun to paint this. It was quite a challenge using a paler contrast paint as opposed to something darker like the Blood Angels Red that we did on the Razorback video, but I think this is really effective. And once again, that glaze that's mixed up with the contrast medium and the layer paint just absolutely smooths it out and makes it so, well, just awesome to look at. I'm really pleased with this one, and it'll look fantastic as a centerpiece for my Space Wolves army coming very soon, once I can finally get hold of some Thunderwolf cavalry. Oh yeah, it's happening. If you enjoyed this one and you'd like to support me further like these legends on the screen, you can do so. Head to patreon.com/warhipster or head to ko-fi.com/warhipster. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, do all of that good stuff. And if you'd like to stay up to date, make sure to click the bell icon. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.